In this video, you will hear the opening session for the conference and our first keynote talk from Dr. Fleur van Veenstra. She's a senior scientist and director of science and strategic analysis and policy department at TNO. In her talk, she presented how artificial intelligence and data science has been used in the public sector, such as policymaking. She also presented some challenges and opportunities in use of AI in the public sector. And one very interesting point she raised is about transparency, and she also mentioned the large gap between the technical transparency and actionable transparency. So if you are interested, please keep watching.
My name is Visara Urovi. I'm your host today, together with Linda Reisvik. We're going to introduce this conference to you. A little bit about me. I'm an associate professor at the Institute of Data Science. I teach data science for healthcare, and I work on decentralized healthcare data sharing platforms. Linda's going to introduce herself a bit later in the program, and you're going to see her very soon. A little bit about the Institute of Data Science. This is our institute is organizing this event, and we do research on responsible data science by design. We are aiming to educate the next generation of responsible data scientists. There are many ways that we do this. Something that I would like to highlight here is via student projects and internships. We do this by working in multidisciplinary teams. We have an upcoming summer school on responsible data science, which you are welcome to join if you are interested in the topic. And we are working very hard to bring in the very near future minor and master programs that will be educating the future responsible data scientists. If you want to know more about us and what we do, I am highlighting here two things. One is the Maastricht University Institute of Data Science website. There you can see all our activities, but as well as on social media such as LinkedIn, you will be notified about our activities. You might not be new to WiDS, but for those who are new to the WiDS event, the Women in Data Science is an initiative that aims to inspire and educate data scientists worldwide. This is regardless of gender, and to support women in the field. The idea is to give the stage to inspiring women scientists and to showcase their contribution. This conference started in Stanford some years ago. They saw the success and the need for it, and they wanted to make it a global event. And to do that, they achieved this via ambassadors. For Maastricht, myself and Chang Sun are the ambassadors, and we bring you every year a datathon. This takes place early in February, and a month later, we follow up with this conference. So every year, early in March, you can expect WiDS conference. As I said, WiDS is a worldwide event, and this year is going to take place in more than 60 countries with more than 200 events. Also in the Netherlands, there are multiple events taking place. Yesterday, we started with WiDS Netherlands, and under this, we have several local events that are going to happen throughout the year. We are following up today with WiDS Maastricht. In April, there will be WiDS Amsterdam, and following up Eindhoven and Twente. To see these events, you can, and to register, you can look at wids.nl website. A little bit about the agenda today. If you joined us yesterday as well, we had 4 speakers. Also today we have 4 speakers. I'm not going to go much into the details of the talks because they're going to be extensively introduced. But I wanted to highlight some of the other activities that are going to happen throughout the day. We are going to have 2 ceremonies. One is for the Datathon, which we held in February. We're going to award the winner. And we're going to have also another very special ceremony where we're going to give 2 awards. The awards are named after Amrapali Zaveri, which is one of our dearest colleagues, and which we want to remember for the years to come. She was an amazing data scientist who suddenly passed away last year, and these awards are on her memory as well. We have some interaction during our break. You can speak to other participants in the audience. I'm going to let you know where to go. We have a panel discussion on responsible data science at 11:20, where we're going to invite you as well to join and to interact with us as much as possible. During the lunch break, we're going to open some table discussions, and you can talk more freely with other participants. There will be a data science career panel at 1:40. Here we will have 2 of the speakers, namely Rachel and Nanda, who are going to walk us a bit through their career. It's going to be a very candid discussion, which we hope that you are going to also actively participate. And we, at the end of the program, we're going to have a career networking session. 4 companies have joined us today, and we'll be pitching their we'll showcase their problems, the data science problems, and the way they work. And you can choose which of them to join, and you can hear more about their work and what they do. Today we are working with Hopin, so I wanted a little bit to get you a bit more familiar with Hopin. On the left corner you have several tabs. Currently we are on stage, the purple button here in my slide. And this is where all the talks are gonna and the ceremonies are gonna take place. However, for more interactive sessions, such as the panel discussions, we're gonna go to the top sessions. And there will be a moment early this morning where we have breakout chat rooms where we go to network. There we're gonna be able to speak directly with people from the audience. We sent this to you earlier, but if you would like to keep in touch with the participants during and after this conference, you can join in Slack. If you are lost and you need help, you can use the chat in Hopin, but you can also ask for help in Slack, and there we will be listening as well. This was all on my side. Before we go to the first speaker, I would like to give a huge thank you to the Institute of Data Science and to my team who helped bring this conference to you. I would like to thank the NWO, the Organization for Scientific Research, Netherlands, for sponsoring this event. The Universiteit Fons Limburg for sponsoring the Amrapali Zaveri Awards, as well as I would like to thank the volunteers for this conference, including the Female Empowerment organization from Maastricht, for bringing the data science career panel discussion, the Brightlands Institute for Smart Society, for bringing the career network to you, as well as the Amsterdam Data Science for supporting us during this event. without further ado, I will invite Linda on stage to present our first keynote.
Yes, thank you very much, Visara. So I have the honor to announce our first keynote speaker. And this is Dr. Fleur van Veenstra. She's a senior scientist and a director of science at the Strategic Analysis and Policy Department of TNO, which is the Netherlands Institute of Applied Scientific Research. She leads the TNO's policy lab activities on data-driven policy, where they conduct experiments using data analytics to develop policy, for example, for energy transition or social policy. She widely researched the use of and impact of big data and artificial intelligence in the public sector. And before joining TNO, Fleur worked as a researcher of digital government at the Faculty of Technology and Policy and Management of Delft University of Technology, where she also defended her PhD thesis, IT-induced public sector transformation. Today, she'll give a talk entitled AI in Public Policy, Opportunities and Challenges, where she will mainly talk about specific opportunities and challenges of the use of AI in the public sector. They will be presented, as well as the role of experiments to seizing opportunities and mitigating risks. So without further ado, I would like to give the word now to Fleur, and she'll have a talk for the next half hour. So welcome, Fleur.
Thanks so much, Linda, for this invitation, and thanks a lot, Visara and Linda, for inviting me, and all the other organizers, of course. If I go back, can I go back to my slides? When I was invited to the event Women in Data Science, I actually felt like I cheated a little bit. I never saw myself as a data scientist, but there I was, and I felt actually super proud. I'm a real social sciences scholar. I have, as I will show in a second, I have a master's degree both in political science and in public administration. So my entering the world of computers, of information technology, as we used to call it at the time, and data science today is a pure coincidence. It's a real case of serendipity. And that has led me to become a real advocate for anyone with a social science degrees or with anyone with any managerial responsibility in government, in the public sector, to understand and to get to know data science and its opportunities and its challenges. And I think that is also why I chose the title of my presentation today, and that is that I would really like to show you sort of the journey that I took over the last 15 years in understanding how the public sector is trying to digitize, use information technology originally, but today, of course, it's all about big data and increasingly artificial intelligence. And that it has led to a unique set of opportunities, but also to a unique set of challenges that are beyond just these organizations or individuals in these organizations adopting these technologies, but that because of its responsibility that the public sector has, extend towards systemic challenges for what society will look like in due time. And that is, I think, I would also I would like to challenge you a little bit today, for those of you that are active data scientists, to think what that might mean for you and for your work. As I often do, I'm often asked to speak, for instance, to policymakers that would like to understand a little bit what is this thing. I mean, they barely often know how to use an iPad. I know I'm not giving them much credit, but often it's like, well, they're on their iPad and they're like this thing called data science and AI. What do we need to do with it? And I also continuously challenge them to get to know this phenomenon. Visara and Linda asked me to tell me a little bit about my background, about my career, of how I got here. Well, I already introduced that I'm a public administration scholar and a political scientist. I studied both at TU Delft and I did a Master's of International Relations at the University of Amsterdam. And when I was a first-year student at TU Delft, you need to choose a specific technical domain, as it was called at the time. So you basically need to choose between chemistry, mobility and transport, or logistics, and of course, what we then called information technology. And now we're speaking the year 2000. And I didn't know a lot about computers. I'd only gotten my first email address when I became a first-year student, something we cannot imagine nowadays anymore. But I realized this was going to be the future. So in a case of serendipity, I chose this domain of information technology, and little would I know that it would literally transform the course of my career for the next 20 years, because 20 years on, I would have never imagined that I would be still essentially be doing the same thing as I did in my thesis, which is to try and understand what the role of information technology nowadays, we more often talk of data science, big data, or artificial intelligence, and what it would do to the public sector. So after a short period abroad, I was granted a scholarship to spend some time in Japan, and some time with intermittence at Linköping University. I work at TNO for 9 years now, since my PhD, which I also did at TU Delft on this same topic. And I started as a junior scientist, and that's led me to eventually I was promoted to senior scientist, which I am today, and I lead a lot of the activities, the more social science activities on information technology and the digital society. So TNO is very well known as it's an institute for applied scientific knowledge. So traditionally, we look at the chain where universities do for fundamental research. TNO is sort of in between universities and businesses or society, applying these the outcomes of research, and that's what we call ourselves, an Institute for Applied Scientific Knowledge. So I lead the work on what we call Policy Lab. I will come back to that later. And for the last couple of years, I've also become a director of science, which means that about half of my time is spent on ensuring quality of research, networking with other knowledge institutes in the Netherlands, and ensuring that the talent within our group gets seen, and not only within the organization, but also outside, which is also something that also in our institute, how to promote more women, or how to, or do we perhaps oversee women's talents, is also a recurring issue, which is also why I'm honored to be with you here today. So the team that I'm working in, we basically, so as I said, TNO is an Institute of Applied Scientific Research. So one of our main functions is that for public authorities, such as the Ministries of the Interior, of Justice and Safety and Economic Affairs in the Netherlands, and the European Commission, oftentimes the European Parliament, they require what we call evidence gatherers. So they want to, with some authority, they want people to gather evidence and to present insights for them to base their policies on. So this is the main task of the research group that I'm leading. And we've been doing that for a long time. And I think about 5 to 10 years ago, we realized that this more, let's say, distant or analytical role of providing evidence to policymakers is not going to be enough to fully understand the changes that data science, artificial intelligence, other similar technologies will have, and that we actually need to engage with these technologies more. And this is what led us to set up a new research line that we call data-driven policy. And we set up our policy lab to experiment with these technologies together with governmental organizations, for not only for them to understand what it will do to their organizations, but also for us to be able to help support them better in developing policies on these new technologies. And we talk about policy often. A lot of the policy on AI is made at the European level. I think you're probably all quite aware with the work of the European high-level expert group on AI, for example, but there are many other policy initiatives. But we see similar initiatives on the national level. For example, in developing guidelines on how to apply these technologies responsibly. And this is our third research line, which we started quite recently, is that we said, a lot of these ethical principles and ideas of how to use these technologies responsibly, lots of people don't find them actionable enough. So we have recently started a new lab we call Oversight Lab, and we try to provide better or at least more operational tooling for people aiming to use and apply especially machine learning or artificial intelligence, or even more traditional forms of data analytics to in their organization. So today, as I said, I would like to take you a little bit on a journey of how the public sector uses and engages and apply these technologies. And this has not been particularly a new thing. So I think since the 1950s, large executive agencies such as the tax office have always used computers to perform a lot of their standard activities. I remember, I think one day, perhaps 10 to 12 years ago, I visited this huge room at the tax office in Apeldoorn. And they made a specific building because they thought one day it will be full of computers that will process all of our primary processes, such as calculating who needs to pay what, or who needs to, who gets which kind of benefits. And it was super funny because the room was completely empty and there were 2 mainframe computers, and it was actually built in the 70s to contain, I don't know, hundreds of them. And they said, actually, we need only one for our processing and the other one is a spare. So what characterizes public sector use of data and technology is that it's not particularly large data sets, and it's not particularly complex data, but it is a huge amount of very scattered, smaller, incomplete, in different formats, sometimes outdated data. And that, of course, as you're well aware, has its own challenges. So with the emergence of the internet from 2000 onward, it was all about digital services delivery. I think we're all fairly familiar now with the process of, well, especially in Corona time, when interactions are even more limited, with going to the governmental website of the tax office, of the student loan office, or of a municipality. But this is, I think, something that emerged 20 years ago. And then for the past 10 years or so, it has all been about data. Data. First, it started with open data, the promise of Obama in his new government to open up government. But that was often being joined by the movement of big data, where we also thought, can't we use these other data sets that are around in society to make better policy? And I think very recently attention has shifted to this notion of what are these algorithms that we actually use to process all this data that we now gathered, or that we now ensure it can be reused. So, well, it's not particularly new. Every once in a while, you see that new questions emerge. Often, not so much supplanting the others, but more on top of so the level of complexity increases year by year. And one of the things, as I said, is, we do a lot of evidence gathering for policymakers. So both 2 years and in this year, we did a quick scan. A colleague of mine did all the, Marissa Hoekstra, I think she may be in the session here too. She did all the hard work, and we did a lot of desk research, interviewing people to find out how the public sector is currently using and deploying data and AI. And what we saw that in 2019, so we've just finished this study for the second time. The first was in 2019, that was the benchmark study. And we really found that it was still a lot about big data, or about data. And most applications were sort of, okay, can we find some new data sets? Can we put them together? And can we find any interesting things from them? But this year we found that attention is now really going to, okay, so we know that this plethora of data does often not yield very interesting new results, because, and then it's much more use of looking at what do we actually want to know, and which objectives do we have with applying which kind of algorithm to find out, and what can we do with it. So we find that there is a much, that the sophistication of thinking about how to use data for public objectives has increased a lot over the past 2 years. We also saw that when you talk about public sector AI, it predominantly concerns the use of image recognition, to a lesser extent speech recognition or natural language processing, and machine learning. However, it was quite a challenge to identify and distinguish which specific technology or combination of technologies is used. Of course, this makes a lot of sense because technologies are often not applied in isolation, but it also points to that it's not so much being reported. So organizations apply these technologies, but they don't very well explain what they actually do with it, or which technologies are used in practice. And one thing that we still found is that in the notorious example of the tax offices using technologies which we now know were actually discriminating, our government fell over that. It was still not yet disclosed publicly which algorithm they used. And then, as we read in a recent report by the Rekenkamer, who also did a research into how the public sector is using AI or algorithm, we also saw that there are two main common applications. So one is to sort of prescribe actions based on the process that have been done. For some call this automated decision making. In practice, we often see that it's more presented as a choice, and then still a person gets to formally make the decision. And the second instance is really to predict specific situations by detecting anomalies or patterns that may subsequently be investigated further. So these are the two large areas of using. So where are these technologies used then for? We found roughly 8 types of application. One was to stimulate open government in the general democratic process. 2 was for which we call tailored solution. It's really about tailoring and personalizing service delivery. The third application is process optimization. Well, I think the word says it. The third related to process optimization is really about maintenance, identifying when maintenance of systems need to take place. And the fifth is inspection and enforcement, predicting risks based on behavioral patterns, such as in the case of the tax office. Investigation, it's a very similar application to the former one, but it's specifically to identify fraud and crime. And then we also found 2 applications that we found much less, but they're about knowledge and archives, so gathering information, citizen sciences initiatives, and forecasting and policy development. So to identify trends and patterns that can be used to develop policies more broadly applied than for individual choices, and predicting macroeconomic trends. What we see, my apologies, I'm not sure why the yellow one is larger than the other one. That's a mistake in the presentation. But the most often encountered applications among these 65 applications that we found are for inspection and enforcement, investigation and process optimization, and they use mainly image recognition and machine learning. Now, for tailored solutions or services delivery, we more often found that it's language processes and speak recognition. And then for the latter situation, forecasting and policy development and knowledge and archiving, it's predominantly applying machine learning. So as you see, there are really 2 main technologies that are being deployed. We also found that it's most often used in local or regional government and in executive agencies. So it's very much used at an operational level and far less for these more strategic categories such as knowledge gathering or policy making. It's also used far less by the central government and by water boards. So for the central government, we found that it's mainly the inspectorates that can be seen as more of an executive branch of the ministries. And as it was very hard to find out which technologies these applications deploy, or it was also quite hard to find out what their status is. So for a lot of situations, we couldn't find out whether it was still being piloted or it was actually being already implemented in practice. Still, what we did see, that an overwhelming, more than half of the instances we found are still to be found violent, but yet another 20% was found to be implemented. So what are sort of seen then as real opportunities? I think we're getting a picture. So it's really about tailoring service delivery. It's about process optimization. It's about identifying risks that can be then looked at further. And it's really about detection and investigation for safety and security. So all in all, what we found is that typically, and this was even more so in our 2019 study than it is today, is that these technologies are used, well, a little bit in a repressive way, you could say. So they're more often used to investigate fraud or to investigate claim criminal activities. Then they're used to, for instance, empower citizens. We do see an increase of this type of deployment, for instance, by early on signaling which citizens may require help in dealing with their debts. But this is, and also service delivery is still on the rise, so the use of chatbots, which can be seen as empowering. How can we help you? But still, it's not as a large category compared to these more repressive ways of using AI. And then another large group of applications, which is arguably less contested, is more about process optimization or maintenance in the physical sphere. And their common examples are that now the Rijkswaterstaat, so the organization responsible for maintenance of the roads and the waterways, they use predictions and much fine-grainer measurements to determine when they need to do maintenance to locks, for example. And they find that it's much more precise than doing it the old-fashioned way by sending a person to a location and seeing whether this lock or a bridge needs replacement. So what are then challenges that arise from our study? Because besides in gathering a lot of examples of how it's currently used, we also investigated 3 archetypical case studies. And we tried to investigate what are current challenges for applying these technologies in the public sector. And one that really stands out is that the development from pilot to implementation is seen as very challenging by many organizations. Not only because often a pilot is set up by enthusiasts that have a certain knowledge level about these technologies, and then the people in the standard process need to work with it, such as policymakers that have far less interest or expertise in working with them. So that is one reason why they find it difficult. But another main reason why they find it difficult is because then the standards for ethics and legal requirements to comply with are considered higher. Then we also observe that there is a general lack of expertise and often also a lack of interest among policymakers, management, and also politicians. I think Arjen Lubach recently had a very interesting item on that, how little politicians that of course need to control the activities of the public sector, how little expertise and knowledge they actually have on these technologies. But they're also really seen as auxiliary activity in their work. They sort of want the information technology to work. They don't really want to think about what it could do to improve or enhance or optimize my work. And then among other public values, we found that this notion of transparency or perhaps openness is often really mentioned as a main challenge. The Rekenkamer recently said that they didn't find any algorithm to be black box. They felt that they could do their inspections of all of them. But I think since that report, general pushback has come from a wider audience, and we too are preparing still a reply to that piece where we say, well, there's a huge gap between something being technical transparent and something being actionable transparency. And with the latter, we mean that if a decision has been made based or has been taken using data or algorithm, you should be able to explain to the individual that about whom this decision has been making, how it has been made. And so this might mean that an expert could look with the right documentation to see how an algorithm works, but it doesn't mean that the general public is able to understand what it means for them. And then we found that the use of algorithm may not only impact individuals, but it may be actually quite large, and we often see a pattern of three things happening at the same time. So first, perhaps via bias in the data set or by applying the not the right analysis, a decision may not be taken in the right way. Then this is met by a second problem. This may then be an intransparent situation where this individual that does not understand why this has happened, or does not understand even that this decision has been made in the wrong way. And then a third mechanism is in place, is because we have now seen that these algorithms have taken over some of the primary processes. It's even very hard to make a formal complaint or even call a service desk and ask, why has this been happening? And then what we see is that this often happens to the same group of citizens, and we see a lot of repeated targeting. So it's not just there's bias of this or discrimination already in the data set, but there's also in the choice of who to include, of which persons to include in the data processing, that we often go back to the same groups, and these groups, they're well documented often because they get a specific benefit. And this led us also to ask us about, by getting a specific benefit, does that mean that you automatically need to become subject to repeated targeting? We don't know. This is what we see happening, but is that actually something that should be happening? So what we said is we saw there are systemic effects beyond the individual effects that may be very strong. And then a related activity, but not that we also found, is that there's a large role for businesses as subcontractors. And there's a question, do they comply with the same ethical and legal standards? Of course they should, and they should be checked by the government organization that employs them to do part of the data work. But actually few public organizations have clear purchasing requirements for their subcontractors deploying responsible AI. I'm going to stop here for a minute. I've prepared a few more slides, but I think I would also like...
Maybe there are 2 more minutes, so maybe one question that I have, and I would like to ask you, it seems like transparency isn't the agenda of the public sector, but is there any step towards transparency yet?
I think we still don't know very well, or a lot of people that implement these algorithms, for example, they don't know very well what is meant with transparency. I think a colleague of mine did an analysis that you can have sort of 7 levels of transparency, starting with just presenting the outcome of a data processing activity, all the way up to presenting the full data set. And the question is, what level of transparency is actually required for which process, and what does it mean for an individual aiming to understand what is happening with their data?
And to follow up on that, in your view, what would it take then to take the first steps in the public sector towards transparency? Would it be publishing those the algorithms that are used, or is there some first step that you see that is more achievable than?
Well, I think that what you are mentioning is a very promising way to go forward. It's not the only one. I think Amsterdam is one of the first, perhaps even cities around the world, but at least in the Netherlands, they're a front runner in the sense that they have an algorithm registration. So they are required to store all the algorithms that they use in this registration. And I think that's an important first step. I also think that it's only one step, but it's a really good start. I know some public agencies don't want to do this because they, for example, in the investigation of benefits fraud, they are afraid that if they publish the algorithm, then citizens will start behaving in ways that may not be desired, because they understand how to, so you get sort of beating the system type of, so that's why there are some arguments to not publish all algorithms, although I'm not sure whether that's, I think it may at least be good to, so I think openness about the algorithm is a good first step, but I think it's very important to understand that that still is not transparent to an individual. So I think what we need much more is to explain throughout the process how we actually use these algorithms. And I think we need methodologies more in an old-fashioned way. I think there's a lot of focus now on the algorithm and on the data science. But I think we need to have much more focus also on the organizational practices around it, because the way you use an algorithm or the way you use the outcomes of an analysis is perhaps as important or even more important. And telling this weekend there was a newspaper article by the two how do you say toezichthouders, so the supervisory boards of the AIVD and the MIVD. So they're the secret services basically. And they said that there's now a new a proposal that they can only control the purpose of the data processing under the new WIF law, and no longer the analysis or the outcome part. And they were strongly objecting that. And so I think we need a full landscape sort of understanding, not only which algorithms are being used or which data are being used, but also for which purpose, for which outcomes, and what are its effects. And I think we're not nearly there yet.
I'm sure. Thank you very much. We're gonna bring this back into our discussion panel as well. I want to thank you a lot for your time and for your presentation today. I'm going to leave it to Linda, who is going to introduce the next activity. Thank you very much again.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video. So if you want to watch other videos, please check our playlist.